something's off, because why is he just standing there just staring away while I'm working out? I'm like, okay. I kept looking, I kept doing my thing, and my awareness was like starting to like kick in. He just came straight towards me.
Palm Industries is the OC of choice for active self-protection. We love everything about them. We love the efficacy of their product. We've seen it work. Our actual employees have had to use it in the field against a crazy person, and it worked. They've removed any excuse not to carry OC. This is going to solve far more problems more frequently than a firearm, and I wouldn't leave the house without it. Get one at get-asp.com/POM. Get-asp.com/POM. Alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am once again, your favorite former Fed, Mike Williver, and I say that because I had to restart this interview because I'm inept. I'm not good at my job. With us today is my new friend, and we'll call her Nash. She is from the Tampa, Florida area, and her video was featured on the main channel on March, what did I say, 13th? 13th.
Yeah.
I'm bad at my job. 13th of this year, and I will make every effort to link that in the description of the audio and video podcast. First of all, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I knew we were going to get along when our email correspondence included a lot of exclamation marks. That means we're both happy, perky people. So that was a good sign. Nash is a medical lab tech. Talk to us about what does that mean? What do you do exactly in that job?
Yeah, so I'm a medical lab tech. I kind of travel to different hospitals and I run the lab. So I run mostly hematology and immunology labs. So I do a lot of blood work, a lot of like urinalysis stuff. I'm the person who kind of tells the doctor what's going on with you, so that they can kind of diagnose you, which is obviously pretty cool on my part.
You know, it's funny. I was talking to John about this not long ago, and he and I are always surprised when we get our blood work back. And like, yeah, everything looks good, and we're like, "Are you sure? You should probably look at it again." That's just a thing. It's an inside joke with us. Very cool.
No, we actually get a lot of patients with that. A lot of patients will say, like, "Are you sure it's good? Because I don't feel too good." I'm like, and I'm reviewing it, and I'm like, everything's within range. Yeah, yeah.
For me, it's like all the drinking I did in my 20s. Are you sure my liver enzymes look as? That doesn't sound right. All right.
We get that a lot too.
I'm sure. So talk to us about you in the past before this incident. Growing up, have you taken any self-defense classes, martial arts, firearms, pepper spray, anything like that? Was that kind of in your mindset prior to this incident? Because you certainly look like you'd at least given it some thought. Let's put it that way. Judging on what I saw in the video, you weren't. You were definitely ready, at least mentally, for something like this that might happen.
All right. Actually, no, I've never taken a single like self-defense, not pepper spray, like none of that at all. Like this is my first encounter of like 24 years of living that I've been in a situation and my fight or flight response kicked in and it was just to fight him back. And luckily, when it happened, I was like, oh, I'm going to beat him up. Like it wasn't just freezing. It wasn't just thinking what to do. It was just reacting. And it was me fighting.
Okay, so I agree with that completely, and I think part of a big part of what we try to teach here. Stephanie Widener is our CEO, and she's a great instructor of all things, but self-defense being primary among them. One of the things she talks about, she teaches a women's class specifically at our conference every year about self-defense, and part of that class is first things first. Women tend to want to make things seem normal, and they have what's called a normalcy bias, maybe a little bit more than men. In some cases, it's a generalization, of course. It's not true in all cases. Yeah. And they tend to want to be like, okay, I'm walking to my car and there's, it's 10 p.m. and normally there's nobody else at my office, but there's this guy across the parking lot, but I'm sure it's fine. That will be the first thing that goes into their head. Like, I'm sure it's okay. It's probably nothing. And what she teaches is that all people, not just women, when something bad is happening, when you have that weird feeling, you need to radically and rapidly accept reality. Be like, okay, this is happening. In your case, I'm being attacked out of the blue. Don't think, well, maybe this isn't what it so obviously seems to be. I'm going to try to think of something else it might be. In your case, I don't think that took you very long. Yeah. So in your case, it looks like you pretty rapidly accepted reality. Let's talk about the day in question. How long ago was this that this happened? What month and year?
It happened on January 22nd. It was a Sunday night, roughly like 9:30 p.m.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if it was early or late. So it was 9:30 at night. This is you're in a gym a small gym? Was it in your apartment complex, or was it like a 24-hour fitness, or where were you exactly?
No, yeah, it was my apartment gym complex.
Okay, so you're in there doing your workout, minding your own business, and at some point, there's someone who wants to gain access, but they can't get in. It looked like you had to let them in, and I have a story about that. So
Yeah.
you had to let this person in.
Yeah, yeah, because I saw him once around the apartment complex, so I knew that he was a resident. And some people do forget their key fob, just like myself. I do forget it sometimes. So I just kind of let him in. I was in the middle of my workout, so I was kind of in the zone, not
Right.
thinking too much out of it. So I just let him in, went back to my workout, minding my own business.
So my story, and I've told the story before on the show, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version just to tell you, is I was a young person working at a movie theater back in the late '80s or early '90s, and I was the assistant manager. I know, a big deal, right? And this guy comes out of a theater late after we locked the doors, and we were closing the concession stand down. And he says something about, I got to go to my car. And I'm like, all right, cool. He walks out, and I didn't get any vibe from him whatsoever that anything weird was going on. And I have to let him back in because we locked the doors from the inside. And I let him back in, and he pulls a gun and says, take me to the manager's
Oh
office, and
wow.
things went from there. So I too have let my own assailant into a building. So you're not the only one. Don't feel bad. So at that
Oh
moment,
no, I've learned to not feel bad. Like,
good.
people who these negative comments and stuff, I have
Uh,
yet to let them bother me because I'm like, you haven't been in my situation, you haven't experienced this, you have no word to really say into this.
One thing John and I have learned over the years, John's been doing this a lot longer than I have, is that no matter what you say or do, there will always be half the population will always think you're an idiot or you did something wrong.
Yeah,
And they just, as I like to say, people just say words on the internet, and you just can't control what they have to say. So
yeah,
I'm glad you have
and
that
it's
attitude.
best because it's best to ignore it and not even entertain it because then you're just feeding into it. Just keep going. Who
Don't
cares? It's there, but whatever.
don't feed the trolls.
Yeah, don't feed the trolls.
Okay, very good. So as you're letting this guy in, I assume your heart's going, you're sweating, you're working out. At any moment, as you're letting him in, you're like, wait a minute, this is weird, or was it just nothing seemed off to you about this guy as the first impression as you're letting him in the door?
Yeah, I didn't think, like I said, I didn't think too much. After I let him in, he went to the other side of the gym, and I was on the other side working out. And like 6, 7 minutes went by, and then that's when he got to the other side of the gym, and he stood there for a minute, just like staring off into the distance. And that's when I realized like something was off. I was like, okay, what's going on? But I didn't want to make a scene or make too much out of it, so I was like, okay, let me just finish and leave. And shortly afterwards, that's when everything kind of just tumbled down.
Okay, so let me ask you, that's a good point. So when he's staring off in the distance, do you think a little bit of normalcy bias kicked in because you're like, that's weird, but whatever, I'll just continue this? Like, if you can go back and do something over, was there a voice telling you this is weird, get out of here, or was it just kind of like, this guy's off a little bit?
It was more so like, okay, something's off, something's actually obviously going on. Because why is he just standing there, just staring away while I'm working out? I'm like, okay, that's when I started being more cautious. I was like, okay, I kept looking, I kept doing my thing, and my awareness was like starting to like kick in.
Okay, um, but he's not staring at you, right? He's staring off into the wild blue yonder.
He's staring like outside. So he's not even looking at me, he's just staring outside.
And is this someone you'd ever seen before, interacted with before? Was he a resident of the apartment complex?
Yeah, he was a resident. I saw him once around the apartment complex, but we never spoke. But I saw him. I knew he lived there, so I didn't want to put too much into it.
But no interactions. He'd never said hi or anything
No,
like that. Okay.
zero.
All right. Very good. So at some point, he stops staring in the distance, and you can watch the video. It's pretty graphic. He comes over to you, and does he say anything? Does he make any suggestions, or does he just act and talk to us? Going to walk us through what that was like for you?
Yeah. So he kind of just acted. So after I got up, I grabbed my phone. He just came straight towards me. He put his arms out to like grab my waist. But he didn't exchange a single word to me. So, but me, I was very vocal. I was like, bro, what the F are you doing? Get away from me. What the F? And I pushed him back. And shortly afterwards, he like chased me around this bench that I put some space between us. And he was reaching out, trying to grab my phone. He didn't really still say a single word. He was just trying to reach my phone. I could see that he was trying to grab it. But obviously I was like threatening him. I was like, get off, I'm gonna punch you, I'm gonna punch you. And that's when I was trying to leave. And when I went to leave out the door, I turned around, he was like right in my face.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh crap, I can't leave now. I'm stuck here. So that's why I ran to the other side and everything else continued.
At any point, did it occur to you he was trying to rob you for your phone or your belongings, or was it evident to you that he wanted something else entirely?
It was evident that he was wanting something else. The way he approached me, and he was just going straight for my waist and trying to like hold me tight from the beginning. I realized it wasn't just a robbery thing because it was more just obviously he was trying to rape me. So I was like, okay, this is more surreal. That's when like when reality kicked in. I was like, okay, I gotta do something.
You've never taken any martial arts or self defense classes before. So, what in your mind at that moment did you feel like, okay, I can handle this? I can at least fend this guy off? Or are you starting to worry that maybe he's going to get the best of you?
So I actually like when it happened, I was very confident in myself that I could fight him. I don't know. I think it's because I'm a bodybuilder too, so I've been, I lift a lot of weights. And when he grabbed me, and I started punching him, and I could feel myself pushing him back. I knew I could take him on. So I was like, okay, if I'm able to punch him and push him down and kick him and everything, and see that he's hurt, I was able to fight him on.
Okay, very good. Yeah, we talk about a lot of kind of fitnesses on our show with some regularly. Physical fitness is obviously very important. We talk about mental fitness and spiritual fitness and all that sort of thing. You seem like a pretty fit person physically, but also mentally. Like you seem like you have a good outlook, and I think that makes a big difference. Some people with
Yeah.
not such a good outlook might be like, oh well, I guess this is just happening now. So, I can't fight this off. But I think I'm willing to bet that your preparation, both physically and mentally, have helped you get through this in one piece. So at one point, if I recall correctly, at one point he's on top of you on the ground, or am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, he was on top of me for about like 3 seconds. And I was able to kind of kick him and like roll over to get him off of me. And you don't see this off the camera because once we're off camera, you don't see it. But once I wiggled out, I was trying to crawl my way up and grab there was like a tire thing, and I was trying to grab it, but he put me in a chokehold. But I was able to wiggle out of that and like elbow his face. And that's when I was able to turn around and just grab all his beard hairs. And I could tell that he was hurt. So I started yanking it even more and just pulling it all the way out. And that's when I was like, get off of me, just get away from me. And you can tell like he was just tired and done. And I was able to push him and just run out.
Yeah. It was kind of weird at the end. It was a little bit, the whole thing was surreal, let's be honest, but it was a little surreal at the end that he just kind of stood there after this all happened. You've seen the video. Do you concur that was a little bizarre?
So it was because whenever I ran out, I went to call 911. And as I was calling 911, I turned around briefly to make sure he wasn't following me. And he walked out the gym and he just stood at the front door. He just stood there. Like he was done. He was completed. Like I'm done with this girl. Like she gave me a fight. And he just walked into the darkness and disappeared. And by the time the cops came, they were looking for him. He wasn't nowhere to be seen or found until the next day, obviously. But that's why I knew he had like something going on with himself in his head.
All right, so let's talk about the immediate aftermath. So you get out, you get away from him, you fight him off. Well done. You get outside the door. Do you run all the way back to your apartment? Do you run around the corner? Where do you go? And how long does it take you to get through to a 911 dispatcher? And then what do you say to them?
So I run out. I'm dialing on one as I'm trying to run. I ran to nearby neighbors that were like two feet apart from the gym. I ran to them. I knocked on everyone's door. They all opened the door, and one couple let me in. And I was calling 911. It took the police to get there about roughly like 4 minutes,
It's pretty
but
quick.
it wasn't even just one cop car. It was seven cop cars in 4 minutes, and they all came out, and they're all like one pulled out his assault rifle, and he was like looking around and everything. Like they were like serious. The guy told the dispatcher, a man just tried to rape me. He tried to assault me at my gym, at my apartment gym. I was telling them all that, and I guess when you call that in, it's more of something obviously very serious. So all the cops came and really were very helpful there.
So can I ask, is this the Tampa Police Department or a different agency? And I don't want you to get too specific as far as where you live, obviously, but can you just tell me, was it Tampa PD or some other smaller agency?
It's fine. I mean, it was Hillsborough.
Okay. All right. So hats off to them for a quick response. You know, we also like to say around here that when you're in the middle of a fight, whether it's a gunfight or a physical struggle like you were in, um, generally speaking, if someone says, "I'll be there in 4 minutes," you're like, "Wow, that's fast." When you're in the middle of a fight, 4 minutes is forever. Now, fortunately, the fight was over at that point, and you were in relative safety in a neighbor's apartment. But 4 minutes is a long time, but it's a very short amount of time for the police to get there. So kudos to them for
Yeah.
for taking it seriously, or a quick response and getting out and getting ready. So when the police arrive, let me back up for a second. So as you're in this apartment, are you looking out the window to try to see this guy or anything? Or are you just like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and be safe until the police get here?
So the couple that let me in, they guarded and looked outside. Like, and the gentleman, he walked outside, guarding the door, looking around, making sure he wasn't there. And the girl was like, just sit down, relax, we got you. And she gave me some water, and we waited for the police to arrive and all. But they were like, they were protecting me. So,
Very
and
good.
I've never met them. This is like my very first encounter with them too.
Yeah, people can be amazing sometimes. You never know what to expect. Sometimes not so much, but I'm glad to hear that you found a safe harbor there. So the police show up. They're obviously taking this very seriously. I assume they start to search for this guy. You walk out of their apartment at some point to talk to them. Are you feeling like, oh crap, I hope this guy's not around? Are you like feeling confident, like, okay, well, even if he was, I gave him the fight of his life. He's not going to mess with me again. Or is that even going through your head in that moment?
Oh yeah. So like when I walked out to meet up with the police, I was confident. Like I was like I walked up to the police, like, yeah, this happened to me. But whatever happened to you still out here, like I'm ready to go for round two.
Right.
Like my adrenaline was just kicking in. It was all like amped up. So I was just ready for whatever
You
at
just
that point.
you just push one of the cops like, I'll fight you right now. I don't care. I'm in the mood for some. I want to scrap with somebody, and you're here. All right. So at some point, the police have to leave. They haven't found the guy. Do you go back to your apartment, or do you decide to stay somewhere else? What goes on that night?
So I go back to my apartment. I live with my boyfriend, so he was here. So we obviously locked all the doors and locked all the windows and
Hmm.
everything just for precautionary measures. But I went to sleep fine that night. I was like, you know what? Obviously he's hiding. He's not going to try again. I would not think so, but he wouldn't try again. And the police they stayed around for another like extra 2 hours or so. They were here until about like 3 a.m. They were still scouting. They were making sure everything was fine. They took all the evidence they needed. So, we're pretty good all night.
So I'm glad you said that. I've had people reach out to me after hearing an episode and go, "Wow, man, I'm so glad I listened to that because this person's reaction was the same as mine when I had a similar situation happen." So I say that to say this. So that means it's okay if you don't have extreme PTS in the wake of something like this and can't sleep. We've had people just recently. We had a guy on who shot the male half of a violent domestic dispute in front of his house and then went to sleep like immediately afterwards. And that's not something you expect to hear from someone, but that's
Right.
a possible thing that might happen in the wake of a violent encounter. So being an educational podcast, that's what I'm hoping to do, to get the idea out to people that it's okay to respond however you responded. Like, don't think that it's
Right.
wrong. Um, so the next day they catch the guy. How do you find out that he's caught, and walk us through how that made you feel?
Yeah. So it was actually kind of insane. So I took the day off from work to relax. My boyfriend was like, just call off of work and just relax, take a self care day. So I was like, okay. So I did it. He comes home from work for lunch, and he told me to go outside to get some fresh air. So I went outside to get some fresh air, and next thing you know, I stood outside and I felt someone staring at me to my left side.
Oh boy.
And I turned to my left, and the guy was on the other side of the apartment, just standing there. He was standing there. And I screamed for my boyfriend and running and throwing all his food on the ground because he was eating. And I said, "There he is! There's the mother trucker!" And he just chases him down. See him spraying at him, and the gentleman took off too. So now they're both chasing each other. And I call 911 and I tell them, "Transfer me to this detective. Take me to him right now." And luckily, there was 3 patrol cars already in the front trying to get footage of my attack.
Oh, no kidding.
And so yeah, and they transferred my phone call over to the detective, and he goes, "I'm here. Where is he?" I'm like, "Hey, wait, he's down the road, blah blah." So, and I see on my right side, there's 8 cars now coming down the apartment complex, and I'm running down to go see what's happening. And once I get to the end of the other side of the apartment complex, there's K9, there's a helicopter, there's now like 20 cop cars. They're all patrolling his apartment. He ran back inside. So by the time my boyfriend reached him, he was right inside his apartment. But all the cops were already there, just surrounding him, screaming, "Get out of here, get outside, we got you now." And it took him about 5 minutes till he was able to finally give up and come back to outside.
Okay, so I used to say this to my partner all the time in law enforcement. There's just some people that God wants them caught that day. Like
Yes.
you were destined to get caught. So all those things coinciding at the same time are probably pretty unlikely. The idea that you see him, the fact that your boyfriend's willing and able to chase him and identify where because had you just said that and said that's him and he run away, well, he could have just gotten away, but he didn't because all those things were in place. That's pretty cool. So he gets arrested. There is always the aftermath that a lot of people don't want to talk about. They want to talk about how I fought the guy off and then everything was great. Maybe everything was great for you, and I hope it was. But at some point, you have to interact with the police and the judicial system. So at some point, does this guy plead guilty? Do you have to go to court at all, or walk us through the aftermath of this?
Yeah. So, actually, so whenever right when he got arrested, I watched me in the handcuffs, get in the cop car. I actually cried, with tears of joy, like, "Oh my God, this man's caught. I can live freely without having no concerns." And then he's still in jail to this day, but he has no bond. So this is how we know he has a mental problem or mental issue. He's not competent to stand trial.
Hmm.
So they're sending him a psychologist, psychiatry, to kind of evaluate him to see if he can stand trial. If he can't, they're going to postpone trial until he's able to be well enough to do it. But his charges are still pending. He has kidnapping, false imprisonment, and then sexual assault. So he has all those charges pending. He's still in jail, but he's not doing well. So, but the state attorney told me, like, don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about him for quite some time. And until then, once we stand trial, I may have to appear at court, obviously, for my testimony. But until then, I don't even have to worry about anything.
Right. Yeah. There's a fine legal point that I think a lot of people don't understand about mental health and the legal system. There's 2 things that can happen. One is that you can be considered to have been insane at the time you did a thing and therefore be found not guilty, or instead of, as opposed to prison or jail, you're sent to a facility for treatment. Yeah. But then there's also whether or not you're mentally competent to stand trial, whether or not you were in your right mind at the moment of the crime. You can be deemed to be not, basically, that you don't understand what's happening. You can't present a defense because you're not mentally well enough to understand the charges, or those are various other things. Right. But I just wanted to kind of explain that for people who don't know. I'm sure you understand it because you're in the middle of something. So, have you had to do anything post arrest at all, or they just said, okay, they're just keeping up to date? Like, okay, well, this is what's happening now.
Yeah, they just been keeping me up to date. The state attorney has been great, updating me every, like his pretrial. He obviously couldn't. They had to postpone that because he wasn't ready, and then they had a competency trial. They had one last month, and now they have another one next month to see if he's ready again. But the state attorney recently just updated me like he is not doing well at all. Mm-hmm. So they're from there. I haven't heard back. So
okay, so let's talk about that gym. Have you gone back to that gym?
Yeah, I still do. I go about every other weekend. I do go with my boyfriend just for precautionary measures. I mean, he doesn't want me going alone. So it's just for, to make sure that I'm good, I'm safe, that I'm comfortable. So
the first time walking back in, there wasn't any trepidation on your part? You weren't nervous or like, oh crap, this is where the thing happened? It was kind of like, okay, well, I'm back here. My boyfriend's here. I'm safe.
Yeah. It was more just so like, okay, I'm back. I'm safe. I'm good. Like I didn't have, any PTSD. I didn't have any you know, any of that stuff going on.
Yeah, and I think that's an important lesson. There's a lot of lessons to learn here, but one of them is there's no right or wrong way to feel. There's no right or wrong way to react after a critical incident. We had a guy on. I think I mentioned already, but he ended a violent domestic and was in a bit of a weird headspace and went home and went to sleep. And there's other people that don't sleep for days. There was a gal on my show, like I told you, that um, fought off a very determined guy, got stabbed multiple times, and then when she had to come back to that house, it wasn't a good experience. With another gal who had to shoot a guy in her own house, and coming back home was not. Excuse me. She had to draw a gun on a guy in her house, and coming back home can be weird. So going back to that gym for you is not a big deal. So that's great. And I just want to make the point that it's fine that you weren't trembling and whatever else.
Yeah.
That's part of your just the kind of person you are and your mental preparation. So if you can go back and do anything differently, replaying the events in your head, is there anything now in retrospect, like if this happens again, like are you going to do anything differently? Like for example, the first time you're like, this guy seems off, maybe just get the heck out of there right then and there, or no.
I think I would, yeah. Obviously, the first thing I would be obviously more cautious about letting someone in. I'm like, okay, if I'm alone, obviously, and it's late at night, maybe I won't buzz them in. That's one. Two, people I discovered because I didn't have it during the time is having, hey Siri, call 911 on my phone online,
Mm-hmm.
so that she's able to call it for
You
you.
just
And
triggered
just
a
in
million
case.
people's Siri to call 911, by the way, just now. So
So sorry, everyone. So
no,
sorry.
that's fine. So
Because mine's on too, but she didn't hear me, so we're good.
that's funny. So you didn't hear that from us, right?
No, no, no. I just it was actually a female, a woman. She commented on my post and she said, next time, do this, put Siri on and have this on just in case.
Now I've got to know: is that woman a friend of yours, like on Facebook or something, on social media, or
No,
just some
just a
random person?
random girl on Instagram.
Because I actually covered that in detail on a prior, and it was the gal. I think it was the gal who had someone break into her home and had to fend that person off with a firearm. And I mentioned, like, if your phone's not in your hand, you can do that. Whether it's an Android phone, I think it's the Google command, and it's Siri
Yeah.
for iPhones. And yeah, I'm dying to know if that person heard that on my show. That would be awesome if that were true. But either way, I'm glad that information got out there. So the point being, for the listeners who may have not picked up, if you are unable to grab your phone, if you're in a car accident and your phone's across the car now and you're on your side, or you're being assaulted or whatever, you can use those voice commands for your assistant. They have to be set up. So your hey Siri has to be set up in
Yeah.
advance. If it's not set up by you in the settings, it won't work, but that's something you can do. And it's super duper helpful. Preferably your phone's nearby and you can just grab it and run, but that's something that you can do. So before we part ways, was there anything I missed or forgot to talk about? I don't want to miss anything.
No, I think we're all good.
Right on. Well, I appreciate it. So you let me ask you this: how'd you hear about this show? Because you reached out to us. I know we talked about it before we hit the record button, but how did you hear about us to think to even contact us? Did someone say, "Hey, this is a show you can reach out to," or you were on the Ask Yourself Protection channel, or how did that work?
So I've had a lot. So I guess whenever you posted my video, you spoke about it. I had about like 15 to 20 people of like your fans and your subscribers, like, hey, he's trying to do a podcast with you. Hey, hit him up, hit him up. He wants to talk to you.
Right.
And so I just went ahead and reached out.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I say this with some frequency. I would not have a show. We would not be learning any lessons if it weren't for folks like you who are brave enough to reach out and talk about this stuff. From the whole team, I want to say job well done. Good job protecting yourself. Good job not laying down and being a victim. And I thank you so much for being on. And you have my email. Anything I can do for you, let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Alrighty, gang. Welcome back. It is time once again for the Gutowski Files, starring Stephen Gutowski, still starring, not featuring. Our contract talks are coming up soon, and we'll discuss whether he's starring or featured in these things. It is his segment. It is his website, thereload.com. Speaking of which, go over to thereload.com and carefully consider getting a membership. Stephen, my friend Stephen Gutowski, who I'm going to meet IRL for the first time at the NRA annual meeting, so I'm excited about that.
Exciting.
Stephen is the founder of thereload.com and the host of the weekly Reload podcast. Stephen, sir, other than being stoked beyond words to get to meet me in person, other than that, how are you?
I'm doing great. I booked that trip last minute as usual, so it's much more expensive than it should be. So that's always smart business moves on my part, but we're all set up and ready to go at least. So I'm looking forward to it.
Very good. Me too. So we're talking about a couple things here today. Two different articles over at the Reload. One is by contributing writer Jake Fogelman, and the title, the headline there is "Federal Judge Strikes Down Minnesota Age Limit for Gun Carry Permits." It's kind of self-explanatory, but Stephen has a few things to say about this. Basically, what it says is people under 21 cannot carry a handgun, whereas before you had to be 21 to get a carry permit. Stephen, tell us what's going on here.
Yeah, adults under 21, right? So you got to be at least 18 years old.
Right.
But previously, you had to be over 21 years old, so or 21 and older. So this is essentially saying that all adults are eligible for concealed carry permits in Minnesota now. This is a case called Worth v. Harrington, and this was Judge Catherine Menendez, who's a Biden appointee, actually, and she ruled, quote, "Based on a careful review of the record, the court finds that defendants have failed to identify analogous regulations that show a historical tradition in America of depriving 18 to 20-year-olds the right to publicly carry a handgun for self-defense. As a result, the age requirement prohibiting persons between ages of 18 and 20 from obtaining such permit to carry violates the Second Amendment." So, if that sounds familiar, it's because that's basically how the Bruin test works, right? If you got a gun law in the modern era, you got to find some sort of historical analog to justify it if it infringes at all on the Second Amendment rights that the court has identified. So, this judge followed that to a T. It's interesting because the judge also noted that she didn't necessarily like the Bruin test because it doesn't allow the well, here's a quote. Quote, "Bruin makes clear that today's policy considerations play no role in an analytical framework that begins and ends more than 200 years ago." So she's saying Bruin requires you to find a historical tradition from the founding era. And she doesn't really like that because it doesn't allow courts or the government to balance Second Amendment rights against government interests in the way you would for an intermediate scrutiny test or even strict scrutiny. And that's by design. That's what the court wants these lower courts to do. And so she said, even though I don't like this test, this new test the court has handed down, this is the result of it. Here's what the ruling has to be.
Yeah, I got to say, just, not for nothing, we say this a lot around here, but I just don't foresee a lot of criminally minded 18 and a half, 19-year-olds seeing this headline and getting excited. Now they can go apply for a carry permit. Anyone who's 18 or 19 or 20 that was going to use a gun for crime doesn't care about this one way or the other. But this does allow young people, and look, not every 19-year-old is probably cut out to carry a gun, and that's fine. 3 of my kids never did. One of them did the minute he could, and I think they kind of self-selected when it comes to that. Like they knew it was a good idea.
Every 35-year-old's cut out for it either, right?
No, for sure. Yeah, that goes without saying. Anytime if you stood behind a line of people, 20 people shooting, you know that not all of them are maybe cut out to carry a gun. But I think that's really good news, and hopefully this will carry over to some other states and some other state laws. You're going to say, Stephen?
It's also part of a trend that you've seen that goes back actually before Bruin, where a lot of courts have been striking down these sorts of age restrictions, finding that they're, out of line with what the historical tradition was. At the founding era, the Militia Act required people oftentimes to show up for service with their own firearms starting at age 18. So, there's been a long line of these sorts of age restrictions being struck down to this point. Although you did see one go against that trend in Florida. Florida's ban essentially on all gun sales to anyone between the ages of 18 and 20 was upheld recently. I believe we talked about that one, but if not, there was 3-judge panel on the 12th Circuit that upheld that restriction. And that's been sort of an outlier. Most of what you've seen are these kind of cases where the restrictions have been struck down.
So the other article we're talking about today, also over the reload, this one written by, see if I can pronounce this, Stefan. I'm kidding. Written by Stephen Gutowski.
Ever since Steph Curry became like a phenom, that's how people think that my name should be spelled.
And the iconic Bill Hader character from SNL, Stefan, by the way. So one of my favorites, by that bit's always hilarious with him and what's his name. The other article, written by Stephen Gutowski, the headline is Florida Governor DeSantis signs permitless gun carry into law. The subheadline here, whatever you call it, I'm not a journalist even, says a majority of states no longer require law-abiding residents to obtain a permit to carry a concealed firearm. That's really good news.
That's called a lead, by the way.
Oh, very good. A lead. Now I'm learning newsy stuff. Yes. So this was kind of expected though, right? This is not a big surprise.
No, it's not a surprise. You've seen the governor push for this in this session. He'd previously been supportive of the idea of permitless carry and was open to signing it if it made it to his desk. This session, he was a bit more proactive in making sure it got passed and was talking publicly about it and worked with the leaders of the House and Senate in Florida, who are obviously also both Republicans, to get this bill through. So it's one of his, probably going to be one of his signature accomplishments on guns as he gears up for a potential primary candidacy here. And so in that sense, it's actually has some pretty significant political implications beyond just the sort of practical application of people no longer need to obtain a permit in order to carry a concealed handgun in Florida, if that as long as they would otherwise qualify for one, right? It's has that, if you could go through the process and get a permit now, you can legally carry without actually having to do that. So, if you're a prohibited person, you've got felony convictions or what have you, you obviously still would not be able to legally carry under this. But like 25 other states, Florida being now the 26th, people no longer need to obtain a permit beforehand.
Two things I want to talk about. One, coming from a law enforcement background, I think some people, reasonable people, I think, might see this and be like, oh, it's going to be blood in the streets. Anyone can carry a gun. There's going to be, every time there's a road rage, there'll be a shooting, and it's going to be all this crazy talk. I don't think so. As I said about the other article we spoke about, criminals don't follow gun laws or any other law for that matter. So it's really a matter of making it easier for law-abiding people to carry. The lawless people are going to do it regardless of what the law has to say. But with that said, Stephen, you might know, is there an organization or a government entity that is going to study this and as these states do pass these permitless carry or constitutional carry laws, and I assume NIJ will do something with it as far as following these states individually and saying, hey, are there more gun homicides, or are the people using the guns, is it more defensive uses? Is it more, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. Is that something that they'll be following, you think?
Yeah, I'm sure there will be research along that, to that question. I don't know that there's like a specific government agency or anything that's set up to study that in particular. There'll be grants given out for studying specific effects in specific states or specific areas on things like that. I think though, of course, you can look at basically the last 10 years, really almost 15 years now, because when Arizona was 2010, I think.
I think so. Yeah, I was before I was here, but I believe that's correct.
Yeah, and so this has been an ongoing trend for quite a while now. You do see, of course, as you mentioned, opponents make the same claim that this will lead to violence. In fact, here's David Hogg, who's a Parkland survivor and March for Our Lives co-founder. He said, quote, "It's deeply insensitive, it's more than offensive, and it's going to get people killed." That was his quote during a protest for more gun restrictions and against this bill. So, you have seen that, and then that's been a pretty common refrain anytime a state passes permitless carry. I don't think there's been significant evidence showing that permitless carry leads to increases in gun homicide or what have you, especially you'd have to show that it would increase gun homicide among people who would otherwise be qualified to obtain a permit, right? Because those are the only people affected by this law in real life. Really all it does, the main thing it does is eliminate those charges against people for carrying without a permit when there's no other crime involved, which has been a fairly controversial crime for quite a while. I mean, that everyone remembers what stop and frisk was, and that was very controversial. That was designed to enforce New York's concealed carry law,
right?
Which, of course, much stricter than Florida is, to the point where it was almost impossible to actually legally obtain a concealed carry license. And so they made it impossible to get the license, and then they would stop and frisk you to see if you had a gun without the carry license, right? And so, and obviously people didn't like the racial disparity and how that was, who was targeted with those enforcement methods. And you've seen that in places like Baltimore as well with their gun recovery unit. Washington, D.C. has been accused of similar tactics. So, and progressive prosecutors have started to disfavor charging these sorts of crimes where it's nonviolent and there's no other sort of crime connected to the carrying without a permit charge. And obviously you've seen red states almost universally eliminate that as a crime. Basically, that's what this does.
Right.
And so there's been, certainly not in a way that anyone is talking to each other about it, but there's been kind of a consensus forming around this particular crime that maybe it's not a valuable one to have on the books.
Sure. It's anecdotal, of course, but I've been to cities all over the world and all over this country. And for whatever reason, the cities that have the most strict gun control are the cities I feel the least safe walking down the street in. Infer what you will from that. That is our time. Stephen, thank you so much for being on. As always, folks, do me a favor, go over to thereload.com, and consider getting a membership. Check Stephen out on his podcast. He is a contributing, what's the title? Just contributor? Is that what you could call you at CNN?
Yeah, CNN contributor.
So he's over there all the time.
Contribute.
And maybe email CNN and say, have Stephen Gutowski on more often. Don't wait for there to be a mass shooting, please, because he's really smart and has things to say. He can talk about more than just mass shooting. So with that...
and they do sometimes. Right?
Okay, good enough.
That is that's what a lot of media talks about, but I have been on several times to talk about other stories as well. Perhaps I'll be on for this Florida one, because it's certainly, I think, going to affect the Republican primary quite a lot. So we'll see how that goes.
Sounds good. Folks, therereload.com. Check it out. Stephen, thank you so much.
Absolutely.